So welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with RokoM Michelle and Dr. Susie. And so this week's episode is on the power of learning to be. And so let me just introduce Susie and we'll kick it off with a quote. So I wrote down stuff, by the way. So Susie is a nurse leader, also does operational consulting and interim roles. She's an author of 2 books, not just one, but 2, and the third one soon to be hitting the presses. So Roko and I actually met Susie when she did the interim roles where she drops in and helps out organizations when we worked at Sutter Health. And there were a number of places in the org I know that you worked. And so we enjoyed chatting with her, a lot of experience and around healthcare and leadership. And so we're super excited to chat with you today. So here's the quote we're going to kick off with. Tension is who you think you should be, and relaxation is who you are. And so when I hear that, what I think about is it's something in the neighborhood of authenticity. And I know we had another podcast with that, but it's something in the neighborhood of authenticity and being true to who you are. So you're not battling against that. So Susie, what's on your mind about it?
I was going to say, I think that's good. And I think, the other thing is a lot of times when we're so busy doing, we don't give ourselves an opportunity to be, and to just, you can't recognize, signals from your body. You're not listening to your intuition. If you don't give yourself space to be, then you miss that. Mm-hmm. I think especially as leaders, we have to have time for ourselves so that we don't miss that.
Susie, what led you to really tackle this subject? I mean, what were you seeing? What were you experiencing that led you to tackle this subject?
Oh gosh, I was going to say this, probably my fascination with it started about 20 years ago when I started my own company. And so I had left a hospital operational job as a senior leader, moved into starting my own business, and quickly learned that, it can also be 24/7 if you don't have good boundaries. Mm-hmm. And so, you have to give yourself time to plan and time to think, as well as time to do. And there's some other great, entrepreneurial mentors and, people in the industry who've written books about, working on your business, not always in it, mm-hmm. And those kind of things. And so I think it kind of goes back to, just creating space and taking time to think.
So it's when I hear that, this is what comes to my mind. Okay. Is that we're going to have people watching this that they're like, I don't have time to breathe. Yeah. Let alone think. Mm-hmm. And so when you say the words, it's like, all you have to do is create space to be able mm-hmm. to think. And people are like, how the frick am I going to do that? Mm-hmm. I mean, I can barely do what I'm doing now. What mm-hmm. thoughts do you have around basically people being able to actually operationalize that phrase?
Well, I think we've all heard, the kind of the quote that if you don't schedule it, it doesn't get done. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, it's one of those things that you have to schedule that kind of time into your schedule, not just run from meeting to meeting to meeting, getting more and more and more to do without having any time to strategically plan, work on things that are important to you and that you want to do, to get some satisfaction in your role. And so I think that, more often than not, we don't block out time, mm-hmm. In our schedules to actually do that. And it's critical, for your own sanity, for your own mental health and
conversations. Yeah. The conversations I've had with leaders around stuff like that is also around, and because let me back up a minute. A lot of times what I hear from people is it has to be done, the work, right, that's coming at them. And what I talk to them about is if nothing falls through the cracks, right? If you keep doing the extra stuff that gets dumped on you and you're working 12, 14-hour days and there aren't the breaks that you're talking about strategically planned, then there's no reason for things to change.
Right.
Because the work's getting done. And
right.
So I think part of the conflict you're going to have is with leaders who are high performers that are in there doing it. That's this underlying belief that they have going is I have to do it. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you about the scheduling part.
Well, I think it's difficult to say yes to everything because you're saying no to something.
Yeah.
And something might be the most important thing that you do is saying no. I need a minute. I need a minute. I need to take a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious because a lot of times when I've coached leaders through doing some change like this, their response is like, what's in it for me? So what was in it for you, and how have you seen it change your leadership, your life as it relates to this?
Well, I think, you become a much more present leader if you're, not running around like you just jumped off the rat wheel. I mean, that's probably the easiest way to explain it, is that you feel like you're standing in the middle of a tornado, and sometimes you just have to step out and you have to stop and take a minute to really think about, okay, what are the things that are the priorities today? And you're constantly reprioritizing. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've spent 45 years working in healthcare, and the majority, about half the time as an employee and half the time, as a consultant. And so, as you know, that we're all basically getting paid to get results. And so I think that, you can keep that in mind, but the how you do it is the most important thing. And really thinking about, what's important to you as you go along your work journey, and that you don't feel like it's kind of managing you, that you're actually managing it.
Well, and I think the other thing comes to mind too, is you look at succession planning, right?
Oh yeah.
So, and I've had people comment, is when you have this leadership role that they're literally going from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing. And then the person that you would pick to succeed you in that role, and they're looking at it going, check me out. I don't want any part of that. And so I think it's one of those things is what are we doing with our actions to role model what we want for other people? Even if you're the best leader and you go, I want you to have work-life balance and I want you to have boundaries and everything else. And yet we are not, role modeling that same thing with boundaries. And I think the other thing that comes to mind for me, it takes a lot less time than people think it takes. Because what'll happen is they're like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time, but how much time do you think it's going to take? And so I think that's part of it too, is surfacing those assumptions so that we can start dipping our toe in the water of something else.
Well, I think, people, when they get overwhelmed, they're overwhelmed a lot of times by the fact of they just keep thinking and thinking and thinking about all the things they have to do. And so sometimes if you stop and you really take note of what you have to do, or you look on Monday, or even Sunday sometimes, what's your plan for the week and what are the things that you have to do? And, where can you give yourself some space? Because, things always don't go as planned. And so you're going to have to reprioritize and move something, out further. And so I think just, setting yourself up for success by, taking the time to really look at, what do you want it to look like? Because I mean, you can sometimes feel like work, yanks you through a keyhole backwards. That's probably a good way to put it, especially when I land in these different, different sites, I think, oh my, the leaders all look exhausted, so, and it's always, a telling sign of what the culture is like. And I think that's the other thing that we don't think about is, workplace culture is shaped by leaders. And so like what you said about being a good example and about leading by example, I just did a talk in Southern California last month or the month before. And it was interesting because as I was going through the content in my presentation and talking about, some of the things that have transpired, of course, in the last couple of years, besides the pace that we already had in healthcare, I had kind of a list of things to do and not to do. And it was interesting because the person that actually asked me to speak at the conference was sitting in the front row, and we were talking about leading by example. And so one of the great examples was sending email when you wake up at 3 a.m. to everyone else of things to do. And so it was very interesting because she starts laughing in the front row, and I can see her people that are sitting behind her, throughout the rest of the audience, shaking their heads and going, and then so basically it potentiates when you do that, everyone else thinks they're expected to do that. And no one can work 24/7. I mean, there's only a finite amount of time in the day.
Or to Michelle's point, you're modeling, oh God, if I were to be that person's successor, I'm going to have to be working at 1 a.m. in the morning,
Right.
answering emails or
Well,
sending
and I hear leaders say stuff like, well, I don't expect them to respond.
Right.
Don't you?
Exactly.
Don't you? I
Right.
mean, come on.
But
Your
you know how
boss-
actions always speak louder than words.
Yeah.
And people forget that, that when you're the leader, you're in a fishbowl.
Yeah.
And so you have to think about how everyone else might perceive what you do or don't do.
Yeah. I want to go back to something I heard you say, and that was, when you're practicing this learning to be, when you stop and take note of what's in front of you, for when you were saying that, what was going through my mind is you can then start to categorize things, right? You were talking about prioritization, but you can also start to categorize things like, is this the work that I need to do? Or, what are the other possibilities of completing that work? Could I delegate it to someone else? Could it be part of a development, opportunity for somebody else on the team? But then it's, instead of you taking it all in, and oftentimes when we are just on that, that wheel, we're not taking the time to really think about that. We're just doing, we're firefighting. So,
and I think, finding ways to categorize the most important things, so if it's a colored system, if you use, red, like a stoplight, red, yellow, green, or a numbering system or whatever it is. I mean, I think that's another important thing, is to basically be able to, figure out what the most important things are that only you can do. I mean, and you know this from Lean,
right.
And the principles of, who needs to do which things, and who must do them, and who can do things.
Yeah.
And so I think just looking at that.
Yeah. That was one of the things. Oh, sorry, Michelle.
No, you're good.
I was going to say, that was one of the things.
So excited. We just all over each other.
But it was one of the things that I did learn from you in the engagement that you had at one of our hospitals, when you were the interim for our emergency department. That was one of the things I watched you do over and over and over again with that team, is you sat back and really talked about, okay, if this is all the work that the leader has to do, this is what I absolutely have ownership of because of the influence or control of that decision, that activity. But all this other stuff, let's talk about, either can we stop it? Do we need to do it? And who else could do this based on their role in the organization, so that you're level loading the work.
Exactly.
And people were feeling more engaged with the work, as opposed to just the leader being the dumping ground.
Well, and you have this, and it just reminded me, you have this opportunity then to upskill people, and have people step into bigger development opportunities, when it's stuff that the leader used to do that somebody else has the opportunity. There was someone I was coaching the other day, a leader, and there was a lot going on. There is a lot going on in the org. And so she was getting pinged with all this new stuff, and I'm going to call it firefighting. Okay. But it was all this new stuff as a result of a new leader higher up in the org that says, I need this, this, and this, and everything, all roads led to her. And she says, and I said, what's your biggest concern with what's happening right now and the fact that you're getting tapped? Because she's like, this isn't my stuff. She said, well, my team isn't being taken care of. I said, say more about that. She said, well, they come to me for, feedback on stuff and review, and before they hand it up to different levels in the leadership. And so I looked at her and I said, so who else on your team can start supporting that? And this light bulb went off. And I think what happens is, because you're so busy in it, that you don't ever look to say, okay, this is my stuff historically, but who else can do it? She's like, oh my God, I know who can do this. And it was the shift in her energy from this like weight that was on her 2 seconds before to that realization was huge. And so I think a lot of it is just those questions that we can ask ourselves. I'm doing a lot of stuff. Is this my stuff, or who else can help?
Well, I think a lot of times people are doing things because they think they should, not because it's really necessary. And so I think that's the other thing, is that you have to sift through, what are the most important things that you should be doing, or that you need to be doing.
Yeah.
And then all these other things, just because someone else did it, it doesn't mean you should do it. And so I think that's the other thing sometimes, is people, especially when you inherit a role, you just start doing what you might have seen the other people do. which
Well,
may or may not be the right
yeah.
way to do the job. I mean,
Yeah.
quite honestly.
Right.
Well, and it's one of those things, to your point, is, and this is lean process improvement too, is ask yourself, to your point, is this something that should be done? And if it should be done, am I the one that should be doing it?
Mhm.
Or does it belong to somebody else?
Mhm.
But yeah, and I think that's a great way, like Roko's talking that you did, Susie, before. It's like engage the team and say, here's the stuff, you know.
And I think give yourself permission, to
Mhm.
do that, to ask the questions and to take the time.
I love that. And that goes back to the quote that Michelle said at the very beginning, right? The tension is that we know that it's difficult to do all this stuff, but to your point just now, that's the relaxation part, is giving yourself permission
Mhm.
to pause and to reflect about it and to say, okay, what's most important, or what is the thing that I should be doing? And what are things that others can be doing?
Well, and it gives you time to take your cape off, because I think the tension comes when you're trying to be a superhero and do everything. And the reality of it is we're not.
Mhm. Well, I think the other thing that's interesting is, since the world of work has changed so drastically, since COVID began, I don't know how well adopted this has been, specifically in healthcare organizations, for people to not necessarily always be working in their office on site. And so, I think back to all the many years where, when we had budget, I would go in on the weekend because I knew no one was there, and I could sit in my office and I could have uninterrupted time for hours and really think about what I wanted to do or what needed to be done. And I remember many years of, directors and managers saying, oh, it's time for our evaluations. Would it be okay if we did these when we were like at home for the day, and log in from home, so that you could really concentrate and do, be thoughtful about what you wanted to say, what you wanted to write, without having, the phone ringing, your people sending you email, knocking on your door, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the other thing, is that you have to insulate yourself from the chaos.
But do it where
When
it's
you
not
can.
on weekends.
Yeah,
I mean, and that's the other thing.
Yeah, I'm not a huge proponent of that either. The before 7 or after 5 or on the weekends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
and
I
that goes
agree.
back to your scheduling time for yourself.
Yeah, and start off slow. I don't think it's a crazy thing. I want to bring back to one of the things that you talked about in the beginning, and it goes back to the quote, right, between tension and relaxation. And there's something that you said around triggers, or have awareness of yourself or what's going on. And what I'll surface is, in order to have that awareness, we have to have some level of calm. Or calm is probably the best way to say it, instead of the stress-induced place that we find ourselves in with leaders and 50 zillion things coming at us. And I know you have some thoughts on how to get to that place of calm.
I do. You should take vacation. Like real vacation. That doesn't mean work while you're on vacation.
Okay.
That's one. I mean, because, everyone needs a break. And I think even, taking breaks during the day is also key. That you can take a walk outside, you can go for a walking meeting, you can get coffee, those kind of things. And then I think, personal things that you can do for yourself to reduce stress, exercise, consider meditation. There's a lot of things that you can do that are connected with people's health and well-being. There's plenty of information, not only kind of in the mainstream, but, in the academic literature about how, all of these things help peak human performance.
Just taking the brain, there was the 3 different brains that we have. There was reading that I did on that, and we need to recharge ourselves. And so
absolutely.
Even just like turning away and leaving and doing something else for a couple minutes, because we tend to just push through. And the analogy that was used, you're pushing through as if you're trying to keep using your cell phone and it's got 2% left in the battery, I mean, you're going to get to a point where you can push all you want to, but there's nothing left. And so that recharge is super important. Roko, do you meditate?
I don't meditate, but
there's no judgment in that question, by the way. I
don't feel judgment. No, I don't meditate, but I do reflect.
Okay.
I do do purposeful. I have it as part of my leader standard work where
Wow.
every day I build it in. So and it's not like it's I'm in a room by myself in dark. Sometimes it could just be while I'm walking from one meeting to the other, I'm reflecting about how I showed up in that meeting or what transpired in the meeting, but I build it into my leader standard work. And if I didn't have it during the day, I make sure that I do it either before I start my day or at the end of my day. So it's something I do every single day.
So that's
multiple
interesting because
times.
I'm curious about is because for me, when I think about meditation or setting the intention for myself, grounding, if you will, it resets me. Right. And so is that a resetting activity for you when you're doing that in between meetings or whatever it may be?
Yeah,
Okay.
it is. It's so I don't dwell on things, and
Yeah.
that could be the resetting that you're
Yeah.
referring to, but
Yeah.
it also is a way for me to prioritize and to
Okay.
categorize the information that I'm receiving,
Okay.
as well as, it could also be how I showed up. Sometimes, depending on your state of mind when you were in the meeting or what was being talked about, you could be that bull in the china shop, or you could be that Zen person that just took it all in and responded as opposed to reacting. So it just depends on, I'm looking for that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Just curious. Thanks. That's my dog barking in the background. Isn't that great?
Yes. Are we gonna see your dog in your picture?
No, one's on the floor sleeping and the other one's in the living room. Apparently somebody's out front that we
just witnessed. We witnessed the tension and relaxation of Michelle learning to be on a podcast with dogs barking.
I'm like, okay then. So we are being authentic, Christopher Mack, in case you want to know.
That's right. You're being real. I love it.
We are. This is real as it gets. I love it. And I'm not going to yell at him to stop because it's not going to matter. So what I want to do is wrap us up though, because I mean, this is something we can keep talking about. I know, Susie, you mentioned a link for meditation.
Yes.
That people can work up to, meditation or do it. And so we'll include that in the podcast. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. So what I want to do is go around for one last thing. Susie, and I'll start with you. So what's one or two things that you want people to walk away with on the subject of the power of learning to be?
Ooh, I love what Roko said about leader standard work.
Okay.
So if you could build that into, your own expectations for your work, for your day, each day, that's a great place to slip in something that you could do different than you do now.
Yeah.
And also I think, don't underestimate the power of breathing. Because that's the other thing we do when we get stressed.
Yeah.
Is we don't breathe right. And
We
so,
do shallow.
there's some quick, 4, 7, 8 breathing, breathe in for 4, hold your breath for 7, breathe out for 8. You do that 4 times. I mean, there's a lot of things about, that you can, even like Roko said, when you're going from one place to the next, you can, everyone has to breathe. And so you can do it intentionally and kind of give yourself a little bit of, a reset, and it helps your, helps your body work a little better.
Oh my gosh, the benefits are crazy of actually getting a good breath instead of the shallow or holding our breath that we may do. Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Roko.
So I think I'd like people to take away the scheduling point that Susie shared with us. Schedule some time, block some time for yourself to slow down and think about the work that you're doing and how it's getting done so that you can prioritize or bucket it, categorize it into what's absolutely things that you need to do versus things that you might bring to the team and figure out how to get it all done.
Yeah.
Or stop. Or stop.
I think the thing for me is I'm going to go back to Margie Hagerty and, what's a little bit better look like? Because for the leader that is literally 50 zillion plates spinning, right? They're going to look at this and go, I don't have time for this. And so my ask is this: start small. Even if you're blocking off 2 minutes, even if you, in between your back-to-back meetings, because that's what we tend to do ourselves in this virtual world, we don't even have walk time because we don't need it. Who needs
Yeah,
bio
or don't
breaks?
schedule it that way.
Yeah. Who needs bio breaks? But in
Yeah.
that world, even if you take 30 seconds to just reset yourself and before you go into the next one, it could be breathing, it could be anything. But just start. And I think that's my takeaway from that, because if you're on the deep end of it and buried, you may just keep telling yourself if you don't have time for it. And we can fit it in somewhere. So what I want to do though is I want to go back to your books before we sign off. So what are the names of the first 2 books?
Let's see. So the first book was Nurse Burnout, Overcoming Stress in Nursing. You can see it back here.
Okay.
And then I also have, the second book was actually Business Basics for nurses. And then in the process, I have just 2 weeks left for the manuscript to be submitted to the publisher for the second edition of Nurse Burnout. And we're actually expanding the audience. And so it's not going to be, solely for nurses, but more across the spectrum of the healthcare team. And it's going to include a lot of information about beyond burnout. Like what do you do? What do we do next?
Yeah.
And a lot of good pithy information about how to care for yourself. Because if you care for yourself first, you're much better at caring for others. And part of that, is taking time out, learning to be, planning, scheduling, getting enough sleep, eating right, all of those things.
Put your own oxygen mask on first.
Exactly. There's a reason they say that in the plane.
Yes. You can't give what you don't have.
Exactly.
Yes. So fill yourself up first and you have plenty to give. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you. This has been Leadership Soundbites with RokoM Michele and Dr. Susie. And so we ask you, please like, share, subscribe. And until next time, have a great one.
All right. Thank you.